Princess Lyrie had always felt the weight of the stars pressing down on her. On Oreth Prime, the royal palace stood like a shining monument of silver and crystal, its towers stretching toward the three moons. The people of Oreth were tall, graceful, and strong. Their every movement was like music, their speech soft and perfect. They were a race that worshipped beauty and strength. But Lyrie had been born different. Her left leg had never formed properly. She could walk but slowly and with a limp. She had to lean on a carved silver crutch, its top shaped like the moon crest of her house. When she was a child, the court healers tried everything to fix her. They used light therapy, bone-knitting machines, even the rarest healing songs of the priestesses. Nothing worked. Her leg remained weak. As Lyrie grew older, so did the stairs. The other children had run fast through the halls, their laughter echoing. Lyrie had followed behind, slower, breathing harder, feeling their pity like knives in her back. When she fell, they hesitated before helping her up. It was not cruelty, at least not the kind they understood. It was the quiet belief that she was not whole, that she was less. By the time Lyrie reached the age of bonding, she had learned to hide her feelings well. In public, she was calm, polite, always with her head held high. But when she was alone, she would sit in her moonlit garden and stare at the stars until her eyes burned. She wondered why she had been born at all. The royal court did not speak of it openly, but she knew. No noble would ever step forward to bond with her. They wanted strong mates, healthy mates. She was a reminder of weakness. Lyrie's father, the emperor, rarely spoke to her except in formal settings. He did not look at her with anger. No, that might have been easier. He looked at her the way he looked at a broken statue, a sad thing that could not be mended. Her mother, the empress, was kinder. She visited Lyrie's garden often, bringing her tea and soft songs, but even her mother's eyes were full of sorrow, as if she already mourned a future that would never come. That day had been like many others. Lyrie sat on the stone bench in her garden, the scent of night-blooming flowers heavy in the air. The moons were rising, turning the palace white and silver. She ran her fingers over the carvings on her crutch, feeling each line as if it were a memory. Somewhere deep inside, she wished someone would see her, not as a broken princess, but simply as Lyrie. Footsteps crunched on the gravel path, strange and uneven. She turned her head and saw someone new. He was not Orathian. He was shorter, broader in the shoulders, his steps heavy but not ungraceful. His hair was dark, his skin marked with sun. A human. Lyrie had seen humans at court before. They were new allies to her people, clever and curious. But no human had ever walked into her garden. He stopped a few steps away and gave an awkward little wave. Hi, he said, his accent strange but warm. Nice place you've got here, Lyrie blinked. No one ever just greeted her like that. They bowed, they spoke formally, or they ignored her altogether. She hesitated, then nodded once. This is the moon garden, she said softly. Few come here, he grinned, a quick, bright thing. Then I guess I'm lucky. Mind if I sit? For a moment, Lyrie didn't answer. The palace courtiers never asked to sit with her. They either avoided her or stood stiffly, waiting for an excuse to leave. Something about this human felt different. After a long breath, she nodded to the empty bench across from her. He sat down without hesitation, resting his elbows on his knees. I'm Daniel, he said. Engineering team. We just got here from Earth 2 weeks ago. Lyrie tilted her head. You are far from the diplomatic hall. Daniel shrugged. Yeah, meetings are boring. I like to walk. Helps me think. He looked at the moonlit flowers, his expression softening. Never seen a garden like this before. Feels peaceful. Lyrie stared at him for a long moment. His words were simple, but they warmed something deep in her chest. Peaceful. That was how she felt here, but no one had ever said it aloud. For the first time in many cycles, Lyrie spoke more than a few words. She told him about the flowers, the way they only bloomed under moonlight. She told him about the fountain shaped like a crescent and the small birds that came to drink at dawn. Daniel listened not with pity but with quiet interest. He asked questions. He smiled when she answered, and for a brief shining moment, Princess Lyrie forgot she was broken. The day of the bonding festival arrived, though Lyrie wished it would never come. The palace buzzed with music and laughter. Everywhere she looked, young nobles in bright silks walked proudly, their movements perfect, their voices full of confidence. Lyrie stood in her chamber staring at her reflection. The seamstresses had dressed her in a silver gown that shimmered like moonlight. It was beautiful, but she could not stop seeing the crutch at her side. When the summons came, she followed slowly to the great hall. The sound of voices grew louder with every step, a tide of noise that pressed against her chest. The bonding festival was the most celebrated event of the year. It was where new unions were formed, where families strengthened their alliances. Lyrie knew she would be nothing more than a shadow in the corner. When she entered, the room grew quiet for a heartbeat, just long enough for her to feel every stare. Then the whispers started. She heard them even when they tried to keep their voices low. Why did she come? She should have stayed in her chambers. No one will step forward for her. Lyrie kept her head high and took her place at the edge of the gathering. She had learned long ago that showing pain only made the whispers sharper, but inside her heart felt heavy, as if it might break. Daniel was already there, standing near the back of the hall with the other human delegates. When he saw her, his face lit up. He waved slightly, and she felt a small spark of courage warm her chest. He did not look at her with pity. He never did. The ceremony began. One by one, nobles stepped forward, announcing their choices. Hands met hands, families cheered, and the great bell rang for every new bond. Lyrie stood alone, clutching her crutch, waiting for it all to end. When the last noble had chosen, the hall grew silent again. All eyes turned to her. This was the moment when someone could step forward for her. No one moved. The silence stretched until it felt like a weight crushing her. A group of young nobles near the front laughed softly. One of them, a tall male with golden hair, spoke loud enough for her to hear. Perhaps we should draw lots to see who must take her. Surely someone should make the sacrifice. The laughter grew louder. Lyrie felt her face grow hot, shame burning through her like fire. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor. And then a voice rang out. I will step forward. The hall fell silent. Every head turned. Daniel was walking toward her, his boots loud against the marble floor. His expression was calm, but there was a fire in his eyes that made even the nobles fall quiet. He stopped in front of her and went down on one knee. His voice was strong, carrying to every corner of the hall. Princess Lyrie of Orath Prime, he said. Will you mate with me? Gasps filled the room. Some nobles shouted in outrage. Others simply stared, frozen in shock. No human had ever dared to ask such a thing in the hall of bonding. Lyrie stood frozen. Her heart was beating so hard she thought it might burst. This was impossible. This was madness. No one had ever asked. Not once in her life. Why? She whispered, her voice trembling. Daniel looked up at her, his eyes warm. Because you are kind. Because you are strong. Because you are more than they can see. And because when I sit with you I feel at home. The hall erupted into angry voices. Nobles shouted that this was a disgrace, that a human could not bond with a princess, that it would dishonor the royal house. Lyrie felt all their anger pressing against her like a storm, but when she looked at Daniel, she saw no fear in his face. He was still waiting, still offering his hand as if he believed she was worth everything. Her throat tightened. All her life, she had been waiting for someone to choose her. Slowly, she reached out and placed her hand in his. Yes, she said. The hall fell silent again. For a moment, no one moved. Then the sound of the great bell rang, deep and clear, signaling the acceptance of a bond. Lyrie stood straighter, feeling something break free inside her. For the first time, she was not just the broken princess. She was someone's choice. And that changed everything. The hall had gone quiet, but the silence did not last. As soon as the bell's echo faded, angry voices rose again. Nobles shouted, demanding that the emperor reject the bond. Some called for Daniel to be removed from the palace immediately. The air was heavy with outrage. Lyrie's father stood from his throne. The Emperor of Orath was a tall, cold man, his silver crown glinting under the hall lights. His voice was like steel when he spoke. Silence. The hall obeyed. His eyes turned to Lyrie, then to Daniel. Human, he said, his tone cutting. Do you understand what you have done? This is not a game. A bond is not an offer you make on a whim. Daniel stood slowly, but he did not release Lyrie's hand. I know what I've done, he said, his voice steady. I know what this means for her. And for me. Murmurs spread through the hall. No one had ever spoken so boldly to the Emperor. The Emperor's gaze shifted to Lyrie. And you, my daughter. Is this truly what you want? Lyrie's heart pounded. She could feel every stare, every whisper like claws on her skin, but when she looked at Daniel, she saw the quiet strength in his face. And she remembered all the years she had spent alone waiting for someone to see her. "Yes," she said softly, then louder. "Yes, Father." "This is what I want." The hall erupted again. Some shouted that it was forbidden, that a human could not share royal blood. Others argued that the bond bell had rung and must be honored. The room felt like a storm, voices crashing against each other like waves. The Emperor raised his hand again. "Enough," he said. His voice was calm, but there was fire in his eyes. "The bond bell has spoken. By law it is accepted. But know this, human, if you fail her, if you bring dishonor to this house, I will see you cast into the void." Daniel bowed slightly, still holding Larry's hand. "I won't fail her." The ceremony ended in tension, the nobles leaving in clusters, whispering furiously. Some were angry, some simply curious. A few gave Leary quick nods of respect as they passed, as if impressed by her courage. When the hall finally emptied, Leary felt her legs tremble. She sat down on the nearest bench, clutching her crutch with one hand and Daniel's hand with the other. "I think I just made half the court my enemy," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel sat beside her. Then we faced them together. For a moment she just looked at him, searching for any sign of fear. But he only looked calm, even a little amused. It made her want to laugh, though her throat was too tight for it. That night, Leary's chambers were filled with arguments. Her mother came first, worried but soft. "You have chosen a hard path, my child," she said, sitting beside her. "But I saw the look in your eyes today. I have not seen you look alive like that in years." Leary leaned against her mother's shoulder, tears finally spilling. "He chose me," she whispered. "No one ever has." Her mother held her close, saying nothing, only stroking her hair. Later, the Emperor came. His face was unreadable. He stood for a long time before speaking. "You have brought chaos to the court," he said, "but perhaps chaos was needed." Leary looked up at him in shock. He had never spoken to her this way before, never with anything like respect. "You are still my daughter," he said, "and if this bond is what you truly want, I will not break it. But be strong, Leary. You will be tested." When he left, Leary sat in silence. For the first time, she felt that maybe, just maybe, her father had seen her as more than a broken princess. The next morning, the palace was alive with gossip. Some nobles demanded the bond be annulled. Others said the bell had chosen, and to undo it would bring misfortune. But as Leary walked through the halls with Daniel at her side, she held her head high. The whispers were still there, but now there was something else too, curiosity. People were watching her, but not just to judge her. Some looked as though they were seeing her for the first time, and Leary realized something she had never dared to hope. She was no longer invisible. The days after the festival were not peaceful. The palace was full of tension. Whispers followed Leary and Daniel everywhere they went. Some nobles bowed stiffly, their faces cold. Others did not bow at all. Servants hurried past them, afraid to be seen staring for too long. Leary could feel the weight of every glance, but Daniel never seemed bothered. He kept talking to her, telling her stories from Earth, making her laugh even when her chest felt heavy. The more time they spent together, the more Leary realized how different he was from anyone she had ever known. He never treated her like she was fragile. He never acted as though her limp was something to pity. He just accepted her, but the anger in the court was growing. One night, Leary overheard two nobles speaking outside her chamber door. "This cannot stand," one hissed. "A human as consort? It is an insult to our bloodline." "The Emperor allowed it," the other said, but his voice was bitter. "If the Emperor will not act, perhaps we must." Leary's stomach turned cold. She knew the court was cruel, but she had not thought they would move against Daniel directly. She wanted to warn him, but he was already asleep when she returned to her chamber. She stood for a long time watching him breathe, feeling both fear and strange comfort. The next morning, trouble came. Daniel had gone to the training yard to practice with the palace guard. Leary often watched from the terrace, enjoying the sight of him trying to copy the elegant sword movements of the Arathian warriors. Today, though, the practice took a darker turn. A group of young nobles approached him, their expressions sharp with anger. "Human," one of them called, stepping forward. "You claim to be worthy of our princess. Prove it." Daniel straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. "And how exactly do you want me to do that?" "Fight me," the noble said, drawing a practice blade. Show us you are not just a weak outsider hiding behind her name." The other nobles laughed. Lyri's heart pounded as she gripped the railing. This was no simple practice match. They wanted to humiliate Daniel. Perhaps even hurt him badly enough that the Emperor would be forced to dissolve the bond. Daniel glanced toward the terrace, meeting Lyri's eyes. He gave her a small, reassuring smile before turning back to his challenger. "All right," he said. "Let's fight." The match began. The noble moved fast, his strikes sharp and precise. Daniel stumbled at first, barely dodging a blow. Laughter rang out from the watching nobles. But then Daniel steadied his feet, gripping the practice sword more tightly. His movements were not elegant, but they were strong and determined. Each time he was knocked back, he got up again. Lyri's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to shout for him to stop, to run. But she saw the fire in his eyes and could not look away. The fight went on longer than anyone expected. Sweat ran down Daniel's face, but he refused to give up. Finally, in a sudden burst of strength, he blocked the noble's strike and knocked the blade from his hand. The courtyard went silent. Daniel lowered his practice sword and stepped back. "Satisfied?" he asked, his voice calm despite his labored breathing. The noble glared, humiliated, but said nothing. One by one, the others turned and left the yard, their faces tight with anger. Lyri ran down from the terrace as fast as her leg allowed. She reached him just as he sat down on the edge of the fountain, breathing hard. "You could have been hurt," she said, her voice shaking. Daniel looked up at her and smiled faintly. "Yeah, but I wasn't." Tears stung her eyes as she sank down beside him. "Why do you do this? Why do you keep risking yourself?" He reached over and gently touched her hand. "Because they have to see I'm not leaving, that I'm here because I chose you. And I'm not afraid of them." Lyri swallowed hard. No one had ever stood for her like this. No one had ever fought for her. In that moment, she felt something inside her heart shift, growing stronger. When they returned to the palace, the whispers were different. People still talked, but there was a new tone to it. Respect, curiosity. Some of the guards nodded to Daniel as they passed, and Lyri could see the faint beginnings of change. That night, as the moon shone through her window, Lyri lay awake thinking about everything that had happened. The court would not stop trying to break them. She knew this. But now she also knew something else. She was no longer afraid. Daniel had chosen her in front of them all. He had stood his ground, and she decided that from now on, she would stand with him, no matter what storm was coming. The days that followed were quiet, but Lyri could feel the tension growing like a storm on the horizon. The nobles who had challenged Daniel were humiliated, and humiliation was dangerous in the Orath court. She heard whispers in the halls, saw hard glances exchanged behind her back. Something was coming. One evening, as the moons were rising, Lyri and Daniel walked in the moon garden together. The air smelled of night flowers, but Lyri's heart was uneasy. She stopped near the fountain, her hand gripping her crutch tightly. "They will not forgive this," she said softly. "They will not forgive you." Daniel shrugged, though his jaw was tight. "Let them be angry. I'm not going anywhere." Lyri looked at him, her chest aching with a mix of fear and admiration. "You don't understand how far they will go." He reached for her hand and squeezed it gently. "Then we face it together. Whatever it is." That night her fears proved right. A servant woke her in the middle of the night, pale and shaking. "Princess," he whispered, "come quickly. Something has happened." Lyri's heart raced as she followed him through the dark halls. When they reached the lower courtyard, she saw Daniel standing with 2 guards, blood on his sleeve. Her breath caught. "What happened?" she cried, rushing forward. Daniel's face was calm, but there was a cut across his arm. "Someone tried to stab me," he said simply. Caught them sneaking through the servant gate. The guards dragged a struggling figure into the torchlight. A young noble, his face twisted with rage. "You dare bring shame to our bloodline?" he shouted at Daniel. "Better you die than sit at her side." Lyri's stomach twisted. She stepped forward, her voice sharper than it had ever been. "Enough!" she cried. The courtyard fell silent. The noble froze, shocked at her tone. "You speak of shame," Lyri said, her voice shaking with fury. "But it is you who shame this house. You would murder in the night because you fear change? You would spill blood because you cannot bear to see me happy?" The noble's face went pale. The guards looked at one another, waiting for her command. Lyri turned to them, her chin high. "Take him to the Emperor." When they were alone, Leary knelt beside Daniel and touched his arm gently. The cut was shallow, but seeing his blood made her whole body shake. "You could have died," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "But I didn't. Guess I was lucky." Leary felt tears rise in her eyes. "This is because of me," she said. "Because you chose me." Daniel shook his head. "No, this is because they're afraid. Afraid of change. Afraid of you being more than what they decided you should be. And I'd choose you again every time." Her tears spilled over. She pressed her forehead against his shoulder, letting herself cry for the first time in years. Not out of shame, but out of relief. Relief that he was still here. Relief that someone finally stood beside her. The next morning, the court was summoned. The Emperor stood at the head of the hall, his expression like stone. The would-be assassin knelt before him, trembling. "You have broken our law," the Emperor said coldly. "You attacked a guest of the royal house and the chosen mate of my daughter. For this you will be exiled beyond the outer rim. You will not set foot on Orcs Prime again." Gasps filled the hall. Exile was the harshest punishment short of death. The noble shouted in protest, but guards dragged him away. When the hall was quiet again, the Emperor turned to Leary and Daniel. "You have both brought chaos to this court," he said. "But perhaps that is what was needed. The old ways cannot last forever. If my daughter has chosen you, human, then you are of this house now. See that you are worthy of it." Daniel bowed. "I will." As they left the hall, Leary felt the eyes of the court on her again, but this time many of them were different. Curious, yes, some still angry, but some respectful, some even proud. That night, Leary sat with Daniel in the moon garden. The danger had not passed, but she felt lighter, stronger. For the first time, she felt that her place in the world was not something she had to apologize for. "I think the stars wanted us to meet," she said softly. Daniel smiled, taking her hand. "Then I'm glad I listened to them." Above them, the 3 moons shone brightly as if blessing what was yet to come. The day of the bonding ceremony arrived, and the palace was alive with light. Silk banners hung from every balcony, glowing in the soft light of the moons. Leary stood before her mirror, her silver ceremonial robe draped around her thin frame, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. For years she had dreaded being seen, dreaded the judgment of others, but now she wanted the entire world to look at her and see her for who she truly was. Her mother entered the room quietly, her face soft for the first time in years. She helped Leary adjust the robe, her hands lingering on her shoulders. "You are stronger than I ever believed," she said. "Your father sees it now." "I see it too." Leary swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "I don't feel strong," she admitted. "I feel scared." "Then you are ready," her mother said gently. Only a fool feels no fear before stepping into the stars. When the trumpet sounded, Leary took a deep breath and stepped into the grand hall. The court had gathered, nobles, warriors, servants, every pair of eyes turned toward her. For a moment her old fear rose like a tide. Then she saw Daniel at the far end of the hall, dressed in the dark blue of the Orath bondrite, waiting for her with a steady gaze. She walked slowly, her crutch clicking softly on the stone floor, but every step felt like defiance, every step felt like claiming her place. When she reached him, Daniel bowed slightly, not as a servant but as an equal. "You look beautiful," he said softly. Her breath caught. No one had ever said those words to her and meant them. She nodded, unable to speak for a moment. The high priest spoke the words of the bondrite, his voice echoing through the hall. "Do you come freely?" he asked. Leary raised her chin. "I do." "Do you stand beside him of your own will?" "I do." "And do you, human, pledge to stand by her through trial and storm?" Daniel's answer was firm. "I do." When the rite was complete, the hall was silent. Then slowly someone began to clap. Another joined. And then the hall was full of sound. Applause, cheers, even the pounding of weapons against the floor. Leary felt her breath catch. They were not mocking her. They were honoring her. The Emperor stood. "Let it be known," he said, his voice ringing clear, "that my daughter Leary has chosen her mate, and let it be known that I honor her choice." Leary turned to Daniel, tears spilling freely now. For the first time she was not ashamed of them. Daniel touched her cheek, and for a moment there was only him, only this moment. Later, under the open sky, they stood together on the palace balcony. The moon shone brightly above them, and the stars stretched endless and wide. "I used to think I would always be alone," Leary said quietly. "You'll never be alone again," Daniel said, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. She leaned against him, feeling the warmth of his presence. For the first time, she believed it. Far below, the palace torches burned like stars on the ground, and the night felt endless with possibility. Larry closed her eyes and let the cool night air wash over her. She was no longer the hidden princess. She was no longer a shadow in the halls. She was Lyrie of the House of Orath, and she had chosen her own future. And somewhere deep in her heart, she knew that this was only the beginning. The next morning, Lyrie woke with a strange feeling she could not name. The memory of the human smile stayed with her. She had met many diplomats, many warriors, many scholars, but none of them had looked at her like that. Like she was simply another person, not a broken thing to be pitied. She dressed slowly, choosing a light blue robe, and made her way to the moon garden again. A small part of her hoped he would come back, and he did. Daniel arrived carrying a small container of food. "Brought breakfast," he said, holding it out like an offering. "Human food. Hope that's allowed." Lyrie blinked in surprise, then let out a soft laugh. "No one has ever brought food here before," he grinned. "Then I'm first. Cool." He sat down and opened the container, offering her a small square of something sweet-smelling. She hesitated, then took it carefully. It tasted strange but good, soft, warm like honey and earth. Daniel began talking, telling her stories of Earth. He spoke of oceans so wide they seemed to touch the sky, a forest full of animals, of cities bright with lights. Lyrie listened, fascinated. No courtier had ever spoken to her like this, so casually, so full of life. It felt like sitting with a friend, though she had never had one before. As days passed, Daniel kept coming back. Sometimes he brought little tools and fixed things in the garden, a cracked fountain pipe, a broken light globe. Other times he just sat with her and told her jokes that made her laugh until her stomach hurt. Slowly, Lyrie began to feel something new, hope. But not everyone was pleased. One evening, as Lyrie returned to her chambers, she found her mother waiting. The Empress's face was calm, but her eyes were sharp. "You have been spending much time with the human," she said. Lyrie nodded slowly. "He is kind to me." "That may be," her mother replied softly. "But the court whispers, they do not understand why a princess would spend time with someone outside the bloodlines." Lyrie's chest ached. "No one else comes to me. He does not look away." Her mother's expression softened, but there was still worry there. "Be careful, my child. This world is not gentle, and the court can be crueler than any storm." Lyrie said nothing, but that night she stayed awake, staring at the moons. Was she wrong to see Daniel? Was it shameful to sit with him, to laugh with him? But when she closed her eyes, she remembered the way he listened, the way he never looked at her with pity, and she knew she would rather face the whispers than go back to being invisible. The next day, she told Daniel about the court's opinion. He didn't seem angry, only thoughtful. "Where I'm from," he said, "people talk too. But you can't live just to please them. You've got to live for yourself." Lyrie looked at him, startled by the simple truth of his words. She had never lived for herself. She had always tried to be what the court wanted, what her father expected. But for the first time, she wondered if she was allowed to want something different, and she realized she did want something different. She wanted to see Daniel again. She wanted to keep talking with him, keep laughing with him, keep feeling the strange warmth that filled her chest when he smiled. The Bond Festival was coming soon. She had no intention of attending. It was a place for choosing mates, and no one would choose her. But as she sat in the moon garden, watching Daniel work on the fountain, a thought came to her like a whisper. What if someone did choose her? The idea scared her, thrilled her, made her heart race. And when Daniel looked up at her and smiled, she felt for the first time that maybe, just maybe, the stars had not made a mistake when they made her.